Hello everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and this is our first stream of the new year. I usually do this on the first Wednesday of the new year, but last week was New Year's Day, so we were all on vacation, but now we're back in the schedule. We've got a packed week as far as streams go from the Lord of the Rings team, kicking it off right here. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this stream, this is a world design focused stream where I'm going to be talking about what goes into making the landscape of Middle-earth in Lord of the Rings Online. Happy to answer any questions that you might have in regards to the landscape, dungeon creation, even some housing stuff. As usual, I'm not going to talk about things like class balance, server lag. Definitely not talking about what's going on with our upcoming 64-bit servers. You'll have to wait until Friday, I believe, the 10th, to talk about that, as there will be a special Court of the Rings with Severlin on, and I'm sure there will be no shortage of questions about those there, so feel free to drop in to watch that. But for now, we're here to take a look at the Wells of Langflood. Another thing to note, too, I often talk a lot and was a little sick over my vacation, so I'm still recovering from it. So if you haven't seen me take a drink of water in a while, please let me know, chat, so that I can take a break and have something to drink. With that said, hope everyone had a great holiday season and a restful new year, and we are here to kind of kick it off. The direction we've been going for a while is we've just been kind of going through the landscapes as we've introduced them to the game. And we've covered a lot of these areas already in previous streams, so I'm kind of hunting and pecking which regions we haven't covered yet. And the current one is the Wells of Langflood. Wells of Langflood is kind of effectively three areas. We've got the Floodfells, which is what I'm in right now. We also have Mist Hollow, and then there's Lindleby. Excuse me, taking a drink. The Wells of Langflood is an interesting area because it was kind of meant to be an experiment with, finding ways to introduce content over the course of the year. And kind of the original idea was maybe we introduce Floodfells, then we introduce Mist Hollow, and then eventually introduce Elderslade, which was meant to be the third region, or the third region for that year. We changed things up a little bit, and Wells of Langflood became one whole region on its own. So we have a great landscape to run through. This is one of my favorite recent landscapes as well. It's got this kind of rugged, bluffy landscape that we haven't really done a ton of. It's got a lot of highlands, a lot of forests, and a lot of history to it, which I think a lot of people probably wouldn't have expected in such a remote place. So with that in mind, we can start our tour. As I said before, if you have any questions about world design, level design, housing, and whatnot, feel free to drop them in chat. I'm going to be paying attention to the chat as I run around, and we'll get things started. So we start out here in the Floodfell. This is one of the areas that I was responsible for building. I really enjoyed generally building kind of more rugged, alpine-y areas. The Shire is nice and all, but the slow rolling hills, for me, isn't as interesting as something like this that has kind of some intense, varied terrain. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the Floodfells and in Wells of Anduin in general. So we have kind of these. There are three distinct areas here in the Wells of Langflood. Like I said, we have the Floodfells here. We have the Sundegrot and the area leading up to it. We've got Mist Hollow, which is the home of Framsburg. And then we have Lindleby, which we were really torn on how much we wanted to show on the map when we first introduced it, because we wanted it to be kind of secret. We wanted it to be hidden. Our original plan for the map was to actually not have that valley show up at all on the map, at least not until a later update. But I think we eventually kind of changed our mind on that because there's not a lot of detail going on there. There's a couple of Stablemaster icons, which you can see there, which sort of give it away. But as a player, as you're exploring around, it's not really immediately obvious how you would get there just by looking at the map. So we were kind of okay with having it on there. Let's see. So Druid's Fire says, we managed to keep Lindleby a secret from Corey, so he had the delightful discovery of climbing up the mountain, and when he got the overlook and saw... I mean, I think that was part of the intention and goal with Lindleby, was for it to be, a surprise. So I think one of the things with this region, at least in the Floodfells anyways, that I really wanted to try to play around with was this idea of kind of a ruddy region. There's nothing too bright and spectacular as far as the terrain goes. The grasses and terrain textures and whatnot is not a super brilliant area. We wanted it to feel kind of like a counterpoint to the Bjorning lands, which were these very, very bright, Shire-esque rolling hills and whatnot. So the idea of having the Floodfells be a counterpoint and a kind of mirror of what the Bjorning lands was really interesting to us. We wanted to have a juxtaposition, something that was not as, I don't want to say high fantasy, because I don't feel like Bjorning lands was necessarily high fantasy, but something that was a little bit more grounded, because we knew that going into Mist Hallow, we were going to get something that was a little bit more spectacular, both between the views that were going on there and the atmospherics that we were trying to push. So we wanted to keep this a little bit more simple. This is one of those regions, too, that was built using kind of our older style of landscape creation, where one of our designers went in pretty early on and did some rough blockout by hand. Right now, our modern current method is to use some tools to kind of help us build landscapes that have a little bit more of a naturalistic look and feel to them. So building something like this by hand and giving it that natural feel is a little bit more challenging and takes a little bit more time. Usually when we would build a region in this way, it could take several weeks to get that first pass height map done and ready to go. And the process we use now creates just like much more higher fidelity base terrains in a much faster frame of time. So, there's a balancing act to it. I think one of the things, too, that might be appealing to do some of the hand creation in areas like this, which are kind of wedged in between some tricky existing landscapes, is to make sure that things are, working right. It's valuable. Like, if you can do it by hand in places like this, it can help fit in together. Things like the Wildwood, for example, all done by hand, because it's just this little pocket of land kind of wedged between the North Downs and Breland and Evendim. So building it by hand made some sense. I think we've gotten better with those tools, so we're able to more easily kind of use a tool like World Machine to help create the landscape. So there's pros and cons to both sides. I think when building something brand new from scratch, though, World Machine is definitely an easier way to start. When trying to wedge in some landscape into something that's existing, by hand is probably the easier way to go. So Druid's Fire also asks, are there any new art assets that were introduced in this area? Outside of some custom pieces that were made for Framsburg, I don't think we created anything truly brand new. Framsburg had a custom interior made for it, as well as a custom skybox. But I think most of what we built for here... I am wrong. There's the White Horse. That it's its own unique asset, but nothing that's like non-POI. I don't think we created anything that was non-POI that was unique for this area. Something that we've excelled fairly well at, for good or ill, depending on the people that you ask, is taking existing assets that we have and trying to find ways to kind of reconfigure them to create new looks and feels in spaces that we're creating. Sometimes we can create something that looks really distinct. Other times we create something that feels very familiar to places we've been before, and often that's intentional too. You can see the Airy off there in the distance, as well as the Karak. So yeah, there's not much going on in here in this region for new unique assets. Some of that was because we knew that both Elderslade and the War of Three Peaks was coming up, and then we were also going to be moving into Gundabad after that. We wanted to make sure that we saved our art budget for those things. And you know, a big expansion pack like Gundabad always has a big art cost associated with it. So these kind of more intermediary regions, it makes sense for us to try to make do with the things that we have. And it makes our artists a little bit happier too, because we're not kind of overwhelming them with art requests. One of the fun bits of trivia for this region too is we did want to have the Warg Riders in here, but when the Warg Riders were originally created, they were the person who stubbed them, who created the creatures, accidentally used the mounted combat version of the Warg Riders, and this being a pretty hilly region, mounted combat didn't work so well for this. So you would often see the Warg Riders just kind of like careening off of cliffs left and right as they were trying to aggro on and attack players that were exploring this area. Another fun thing that we discovered here too is we come up to this quest hub here, which I think is Limlock, I believe, is we had created for this a new higher level guard Bjorning, but had also kind of created them a little bit wrong. And so, no, he's using the wrong, oh no, now he's got the right appearance. So they would, if you were below a certain level and coming into this area, they would aggro on you and attack you, which was all sorts of fun. So Amarwin asks, is this a high-level area? This is. This was a 125 to 130 region. I had originally wanted this to be a alternate leveling path, because I think we were at a point in our leveling cycle where we had what felt like enough content at cap at the time, and I didn't really feel like it made sense for us to do more cap content. I kind of wanted Wells of Langflood to kind of be like, okay, you enter into the Vales of Anduin, you go to Bjorningist, and then you kind of have your option of, do you want to go south through the Vales of Anduin, or you could turn north and you could go up into the Wells of Langflood and kind of have a leveling experience there. But at the time, I think I was kind of overruled on that, and people in general felt that it should be a cap region for that current cap. So Mr. Alex 13P says, I like how the landscape elevates from Rohan to Elderslade. How much height can you build a landscape in general? So we do have a ultimate elevation cap that we can go to. I think it's around, I want to say around 3,000 meters is our highest, at which point you can't build any higher. So most of our terrain, we try to make sure any peak we have caps out before we get to that height, because once you get to that height, you can't go any higher. It may be that you can't go any higher, or we can go higher, but the player can't physically go higher. There may be like a roof to the world kind of thing. But our height map is effectively, when you export it, it's a grayscale image. So we only have that kind of grayscale range to work with. I'm not sure exactly how many colors are supported by that, though. It's not something that it's not something that we ran into. We did run into an issue way back at the beginning of the game where when we were taking radar images, the radar image would cut off based off of the height of the terrain. So when we were generating, back in like beta, when we were trying to generate radar images for the Misty Mountains, as an example, we would hit a cutoff point, and the Misty Mountains, you would, see mountain peaks that were just cut off in black. And that's because the radar was cutting off the terrain after a certain elevation, even though the elevation itself was completely fine and viable. So yeah, that was one of the fun challenges of early production, but that got fixed, thankfully. Once in a while, we'll still see something like that crop up visually when we are generating radar images, but that is only an artifact that occurs when we're looking at it in our tools. What's actually printed out for the radar images is what is expected. All right. Paolo Modus says, I think you guys could make these regions with shorter bushes because sometimes we can't even see hobbits moving. That's something that we were attempting to be mindful of, at least in the Bjorning lands. And some of these bushes here are shorter versions or squatter versions. I think one of the tricky things too is like it is hard to build stuff like this when the camera controls can dolly in and out like this, because we're never knowing where we can guarantee that a player's camera is going to be. A lot of modern games kind of fix your camera in a certain position. Third-person games fix your camera in a certain height and position, and so you don't really get as much of the free movement camera that you get in something like Lord of the Rings or even in a lot of older games. And so that makes it hard for us to know where we should put heights on things. If we have grass too short, it doesn't really look great in certain angles, but if we have it too long, other angles or other characters just have a hard time seeing things. So we try to find some balance. I certainly think there are some bushes that we could, squish down a little bit, and maybe that's something that we can introduce over time as quality of life improvements. Not something that I think we have time to do as part of our update 43, which is our quality of life update, which will be coming up soon. But it is something to think about, especially as we enter new regions, create new bushes and whatnot, like how tall, how big, etc. Some of it too is an artifact of a lot of these kinds of bushes being things that were actual physical objects in the past. Most of these bushes, these big dense bushes, were actual physical obstacles, and we eventually made the decision to change that. One, to just like reduce the complexity of a landscape, especially if you're on a mount, you're running around, especially since a lot of people prefer running around on their mounted combat steed because it's just faster travel. Having all of these physics obstacles in the way makes it challenging to just navigate a space. So turning off physics on things that don't really need it went a long ways towards helping solve those issues. But then it also introduced the side effect of now these bushes are too big when I run through them. Let's see. Would be awesome to see the jetpack view, just suggesting. We don't necessarily need a jetpack view, I just need to get high enough up into the hills to look down and see everything. Alright, let's see. A boring streamer asks, any possibility to buy new sockets for furniture in houses, please, for Mithril? I need it a lot. So one of the things that we would like to think about adding in the future, we have a lot of ideas for hooks. One of them being hook packs that you could use to extend the number of hooks in a house. Some of that is going to depend on researching on how 64-bit servers perform with additional hooks. It may be something where we think about, okay, what neighborhoods could use these? Like, how can we add more value to like the original neighborhoods if those original neighborhoods get hook packs over the premium neighborhoods, like those sorts of things. I am a little hesitant to introduce introduce more hooks to premium housings, just because it can be expensive to load some of those things, and we're kind of pushing we're pushing the number that I want to push. I don't really want to add more if I can avoid it, because I want those places to still be somewhat performant. Mr. Alex13 says, I also love mountainous regions with thick roads and rocky edges. Most of the game's landscape is open and wide, which is not bad, but we need more hill areas. I agree. I think those areas have definitely a precarious appeal to them. So like running around in an area like this where you've got this, you're running along an edge, you've got this kind of ravine below you with water running through it. Those feel good. The tricky thing about them is building them in a way that also makes it easy for players to get out of the water, get out of the deep spots with pretty regular intervals, so that they're not kind of stuck just swimming through this without a way up. I think that's something, especially since we built when we built I will remember this shortly, when we built the troll shaws, that often there are so many ravines and other passes in the troll shaws where you fall down and you slide off a cliff, and now you have to backtrack a considerable amount, and that doesn't really feel great to have to do, right? Like, you don't want to have to spend a ton of time doing all that backtracking just to get back to where you were. So that's where those kind of very ledgy, craggy regions can be challenging from a design perspective, is in allowing players the opportunity to kind of get back to where they were if they fell off and not get frustrated. If you slide off a waterfall and now you're looking at a 10 or 15 minute walk basically to get back to where you were, it makes it easy for you to decide to just take a break or recall out and disrupt whatever gameplay flow you had going on. So we're coming up on the White Horse here. This was another of our POIs. This one was tricky too, because it really pushed the terrain fidelity that we had, because we got this model, and I kind of had to sculpt the terrain to feel like it was fitting around the model. So you can see here where like the frills end and whatnot. So I had to try to find ways to like sculpt the terrain to kind of feel like it was naturally connecting with everything, while still making sure that the frills were showing up, and our terrain doesn't have quite the mesh fidelity to really get super accurate in a lot of places that I would have wanted to. So like things like this, where I wish I could have pulled up the terrain a little bit more, but the terrain mesh just couldn't do it. Or you even see stuff like this where you've got the grass popping through, and that's another terrain fidelity issue. This is a really like interesting POI. Let me zoom out for it, and it's got some history tied to it with the Rohirrim as kind of like a Neolithic interpretation of a horse. But it wasn't without its own trials when trying to get it implemented into the game. Is there a reason why we don't have any campsites for this region? I don't think there would be any specific reason. Usually and often, campsites are something we had in the past kind of used when it came to supporting instance gameplay, things like gathering points and whatnot, so you could use the campsite as kind of your meeting point before going into the instance. And I think having the instance finder has kind of pushed the things like the player campsites to the wayside, because players aren't necessarily gathering at the entrance to an instance anymore before moving in. And since a lot of our landscape gameplay is by and large meant to be soloable, there isn't as much of a need for those kinds of things on the landscape. I don't think there was an intentional decision as to whether or not to have one. I think it was more just a case of, oh, we don't have any instances in this area, so we don't need to worry about this kind of thing. Whether that's right or wrong, that's up for debate. I know there are some people that like to have that as kind of like an extra bind point with their characters, but in general, that's kind of, I think, where we landed on when we were talking about it. Now, Henji's Leap was something that, one of the things that I was like thinking about doing for this but never got around to it, was I kind of wanted to build a world event around this broken bridge and use this as a way for players to kind of like come together and help with the reconstruction of the bridge, and then they would be rewarded by doing that with unlocking access to a dungeon or instance, a public dungeon or a private instance on the other side of the bridge. Sadly, we never got around to it. We didn't have time for it. But maybe someday, if we ever find ourselves bored and looking for things to do, that might be something that I could spend a little bit of time on. I've got the world event systems pretty well in hand. It's just a matter of figuring out building the bridge and then building the space to go beyond it. Let's see, some more questions. I know this is just a random question, but has there ever been talk about having race-specific mounts? So, for example, a mount only hobbits could ride. I don't think we've ever had that kind of conversation. At least I don't remember ever having that kind of conversation. In part because, I feel like more and more as games progress more and more, that sort of restriction kind of just hinders the player ability to do what they want with their characters. Characters become more and more about identity and cosmetic than they do about meaningful gameplay decisions, and your actions are more where your meaningful gameplay decisions come from. I think, and there's been some talk about things like, racial traits and whatnot. I think there's room for maybe something where it's like, oh, maybe a hobbit could be granted this mount for free, and dwarf, men, Bjornings, elves would have to do a quest line or something to get access to it. I think there's room for that sort of thing, but I don't think we would ever, at least at this point in the game, directly restrict access to something like that, particularly something cosmetic, based off of a character's race. I know we have some outliers that are kind of like that now, like with the bare-chested dwarves and whatnot, but I think there's also a reason why we haven't done more of those sorts of things. Alright, let's see if there are any. So, are there tons of quests there? Looks like I will be going there ASAP. There are a lot of quests in this region. I am just zipping through, and I have a lot of my icons turned off just to make it easier for everyone to see what's going on. So that's why when walking in there, you may not have seen much for quest icons when I walk into a space. But this is a fully fledged region, full of quests, and a pretty good storyline. Alright, let's see. Lost Shire Hobbit says, do you design each other separately, or was it all in one thing? How did you decide where to put Framsburg in the region? So as usual, like we do a lot of research when it comes to building out these regions. So there is considerable research done that kind of what informs where we're going to put things. I don't know specifically if Framsburg was called out to be on that kind of bluff that it was, but we felt like that was going to be a really compelling and interesting view for players to have, both as they approach it from the distance, kind of seeing that aspirational location. You know, that's one of the things that's always kind of a hallmark of solid level design, world design, is, you know, letting players see where they're going to be going, and through that vision kind of be able to achieve that destination ultimately in the end. So as we were like coming up through the Floodfells, you could see the silhouette of Framsburg in the distance, and that makes you go, oh, I want to go there. And then so you get that rewarding satisfaction when you have finally like climbed the mountains, climbed the peaks, and gotten to that location. At least that's the goal anyways. Whether or not we're always successful in those regions, like some regions lend themselves to it better than others. But even here, as you enter Mist Hollow and the mist starts coming in and the clouds are there, you can kind of see the specter of Framsburg poking up in the distance. Or sorry, that's not even Framsburg, that's Elderslade, my bad. Framsburg is here. We're already almost there. I think. I don't know. It has been a while since I've been in this region, so I may also be very far off, which could be the case. Yeah, which is the case. That is Framsburg. Don't mind me. I am remembering this as we go along. And then as far as designing each area, you know, usually as part of our region personality development, we have a kind of high-level sense of where we're going, what we're doing, what the thematics for a given region are meant to be, and that kind of points us in the direction, you know, heads us towards where we want to go. And then when an individual designer starts working on it, that's when they can kind of put their own twist and flavor on it. It gives the individual designers their opportunity to put their own thumbprint on an area. You know, we have a high level sense of like, here's the kinds of trees and rocks and structures that should be in the area, but we don't often fully dictate what it should look like, unless there is a very specific lore description about what it should look like. I think in the case of Framsburg, the intention, you know, what bits of it there are is basically, you know, in the lore, in the source material, is just like very little, like, oh, it's ruins now. This is where the Rohirrim had their origins as the Eothead, you know, and, you know, because of that, we had a lot of freedom to kind of figure out how we wanted things to move forward from there. All right, so deep river areas. So Antol. So I apologize because I'm answering questions that may have been asked minutes ago as I was exploring other areas. So there may be context here as I'm answering questions. So Antol says, I mean, like hiding deep river areas, but for that specific reason, we need boat mounts that we can use in water. You know, it is on the wish list for us as well to have boat pants. When we get to that, I'm sure there will be plenty of opportunities for traversal. But until such a time, it's swimming or teleporting through stable travel. Let me just rocket jump myself in a weird random direction. I don't think I'm gonna land where I want to land. Alright, close enough. Close enough. The tricky thing about the jetpack, the one jetpack being an explosion underneath my feet as opposed to an actual no-clip mode is I kinda am at the whims of physics when I'm using it. These assets, I always have fun using them. They are such a simple asset, but they have such a like decayed city feel to them that a lot of our current, you know, the ruins and whatnot that we use pretty regularly, particularly those found in Gondor, just don't have. Like the ones in Gondor, they often feel more destroyed than they feel ruined. And I think this set, which originally like its classification was like the Battlefield Ruin set, evokes ruin more so than destroyed. You know, like this has just been weathered and lost to time as opposed to destroyed. All right. So Mr. Alex says it would be nice to adjust level range for quest packs that only serve their level cap, so that we can go as an alternate to lower levels. You know, I think that is not without its own considerable challenge. Like it would certainly be useful for some areas. Like I think we have several expansion packs worth of original Gondor that are all kind of stuck at the same level cap, and it would be kind of useful to, you know, try to apply some sort of progression to them. Here we will go. Will it let me in? It will. Awesome. So this is the Framsburg interior. It uses a skybox instead of the actual sky system, mostly because I wanted to make sure that we got the mountains and whatnot in. So it kind of sets it at a very specific point in time during the day, unfortunately. But I know the person that built this had a lot of fun building this space. So we have a custom asset, which is the first room we walked into, and then, you know, using our other modular pieces to build out the rest of it. And I know that they really enjoyed building with this set and with those pieces. It's always kind of fun to get a new piece for an existing set, because then your mind can kind of just like run with it and think like, oh, how can I incorporate this into, you know, what I'm making, or if I make something new, what ways can I use this new asset? So Ponton Finberry says, one of the things I love about this region, aka the Wells of Langflood, is the White Horse. All right, I'm going to do my usual jump off a cliff thing because I'm immune and I can do it. Maybe if I, there we go. Get a good overhead view of the interior of Framsburg. But for the purposes of this, it's time to just go cliff diving. Whee! So I think one of the things too that works well for these lower areas of Mist Hollow is the fogginess of them really does help obscure where we're going next. You know, jumping off from the cliff there, you kind of get a view of the path, but normally you wouldn't have that view. The clouds would be blocking your view, the fog would be blocking your view. So you really you're jumping off a cliff to find the trail and then finding yourself at a defeat circle because of it. I know the person who built Lindleby and built this pass up really enjoyed it. This is kind of the kind of switchback that we don't do all that often. And again, it kind of goes back to the fidelity of our terrain and having the right assets for it. Because often we need to, like, in order to make it not feel super jagged, we have to make the switchbacks bigger and kind of swing out more than we want them to. But when we get it right, they can feel like really, really nice, really, really good. There was an area that I had built for Gundabad where I built a giant switchback that was a intentionally constructed switchback. It wasn't one that we're just going to go down here for the view real quick. It wasn't a switchback that was natural. It was one that the dwarves had carved. But so like that view, that is a great view. I love that. That feels great. So about grass on roads, Lotro's engine have the possibility to have a depth mask in the way that how modern games water surfaces to remove them from boats. We have other methods of removing grass from roads. When there are occurrences of grass in roads, if it is not something that is intentional by us, it's more than likely just a bug. It's like, oh, well, we can fix that. Just let us know where you're finding it. I think one of the things that I often see whenever I say to players, like, if you see a bug, report it. I often see the feedback of is like, well, don't you know where it is already? And it's like, well, this is a closing in on 20-year-old game, and it's really, really big. It's not entirely reasonable to expect any of us to know exactly where everything is, where every single blade of grass is. So having your support, having the player support in kind of finding where those defects are, goes a long ways towards us finding and resolving those issues. We can certainly like guess where something might be based off of the kinds of terrain textures and rocks and how they're used all together, but that's not a guarantee that we're going to be able to exactly find it. All right, and now we enter into the Vale of Lindleby. This was a space that we hadn't really done a hobbity thing in a while, so this was definitely a breath of fresh air for the designer who got to build it. And it was something too that when we introduced it, it caused a good amount of confusion among the players. Because we'd had players that just rolled right in, and they see this whole vale full of Hobbit stuff, but they saw no one. There was no NPCs here, no vendors, nothing. And so there was like ample confusion about what was going on initially. Like they would walk in and they're like, "Hey, what's going on here? Like there's nothing here. It must be bugged." And we got a lot of bugs. Because players rushed here without starting the content that led into here. Starting the quest lines that eventually brought you here and kind of unlock the mysteries. So as players rolled in, they were expecting to find quest NPCs and whatnot, and they didn't. And so that just kind of led to the assumption that things were broken. And turns out that wasn't the case. Zero Hot 89 says, I would love to see an orc faction and characters so that you could level them up and do the same things like the free people. That is something that I think was part of kind of the original design for Middle-earth Online, where the idea was this sense of land control and capturing territory and having content experiences for good and evil characters. The challenge and struggle with that is then we're effectively building content that only half the player base might get exposure to, right? Like, I think it can certainly help tell a story, but if you're trying to fill a world with content and only half of it is available to any given character, that's a hard sell. That's hard to kind of sit there and say like, yes, this is what we're going to make. There are games that have done that in the past, and I think their success has varied as far as that goes. I think, like I said, I think it can help build an interesting dynamic in the world, but when you're trying to build a volume that includes a certain amount of gameplay, cutting the content experience in half, makes it hard to fill that volume, and that's kind of why we pulled back from that concept for Middle Earth, or from Middle Earth Online, when we started working on Lord of the Rings. And we also we're not building a game that is a PvP focused game. I just saw your second comment there. We're not building a PvP focused game, so that also was something that we kind of pulled back on. We did experiment a little bit with it when we had a brief tenure running the game in China, and one of the requirements for that was to have a more open world PvP experience, because that was very important to that player base. But ultimately it was kind of against what we were building, and not really what we were wanting to achieve with the IP that we were working with. Because we wanted to be story first. Druid's Fire says, I thought it was fascinating that the Aothead, who eventually became the Rohirrim, were such a horse-centric culture in an area which seems to be more suitable for goats and oxen and such. Yeah, I think, and I think there's even lore components kind of explaining why the horse population is much less in these regions. We tried to lean into some of that in the storytelling in the Vales of Anduin, and really show kind of what remained of the horse populations in this region. But you're right, like far, far north, this rugged, rocky terrain, this is more like mule country than it is horse country. And here we have the biggest mystery that existed for a very, very long time. When we introduced this region, we kind of left this here as kind of a big, big tease. And for several years, nothing happened with it, and a lot of people weren't sure what was going on with it. They thought it might be an access point to another region beyond. A lot of people rightly guessed that it was earmarked for housing. And when we had the spare cycles for it, we built the Lindleby housing neighborhood through there as well. Bredgar83 says, housing question if you don't mind answering. Is there a reason why it's so hard to align stuff like floors or walls? I always seem to be a few pixels off, like they're not moving on the same world grid. So I'm assuming you're meaning decoration items. I think it has a lot to do with what distance each tick on the decoration bar is. And I think the smaller the range that a hook has, the less distance each tick on the bar has to go, which could make things move a little bit smoother. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there, where if we want to have housing hooks have a good long range so that you can basically move all of the hooks around your entire house, that means that kind of each tick is going to have to be bigger, because it's a percentage of the total distance that hook can move. Maybe that could change in the future, or we could address the way it scales, and the way the ticks on the bar move. But that, I think, is the best explanation I can give to you for that, because I do think that maybe the original neighborhoods, moving things around might be a little bit easier, because the movement range for those hooks is much less than in something like a premium housing neighborhood. Epic Games TV asks, is the team still working on a mentoring system for high levels to group with low levels? I'm not going to be able to answer that question for you. That is a game systems question. You could potentially try asking it tomorrow in our We Have a Cave Troll stream. Orion will be there, so you could see if he has any further clarification on it, but I am not going to be able to answer it personally for you. It's not in my wheelhouse. All right, I'm going to take a look at a few more questions before I bounce to other areas in the world. Druid's Fire says, and to me this is also fascinating that it's all stonework when Rohan is mostly wood with limited stonework. I think a lot of that has to do with the region you're in, right? Like you're in this rocky, craggy area of the world, and stone is abundant, and good trees for building might not be as viable. The kinds of trees might not be the trees that you want to use, but stone is there. You can build a stone wall with minimal chiseling and whatnot. Sam Burke says, I noticed that bear cubs are awesome stealth detectors. They even detect invisible admin characters. They just want hugs. Bear cubs, they just want hugs. That's how they find you. Demelsa says, climbing up and discovering Lindleby for the first time was a moment. And I'm glad that seems to be a sentiment that is echoed a lot in this thread, is that, discovering Lindleby for the first time was something that was surprising and welcome. I think one of the things that, at least in this area of the world, Hobbit's origins in these regions aren't super well defined, super detailed, and there's always just this kind of assumption that Hobbits only exist in the Shire. So having an opportunity to show that those cultures exist elsewhere, whether it's Lindleby here or hiding out in Edidwaith and Swanfleet, showing that there's kind of more diversity and hardiness to them, and show that they are spread out around the world as well, in pockets here and there, I think rounds them out a little bit more, makes them a little bit more worldly, while still allowing the Shire hobbits themselves to still be that kind of innocent society that the Rangers felt really had to be protected. Let's see. Boring Streamer says, nice new locations. Thank you and all the LOTRO team for working on this game and adding new content for players. We're happy to do it. We're adding new content. We're here for it. I'm actually starting to do my work on upcoming landscape stuff for later in the year now, and it's gonna be exciting. I'm looking forward to it. All right, so here we are in Sundergrot. I wanted to pop into these landscape areas as well as we kind of get close to the end of our stream. Sundergrot was interesting because we needed to have two versions of it. We needed to have this pristine, fully built city, basically, that could be used for storytelling. And we don't often build dwarf spaces that are open air like this. So it was really fun to build an open air dwarf stronghold. And to use assets, honestly, to use assets in ways that we don't use too often. Like, you look over here and those are pieces that might look familiar, but they are kind of rotated in ways to imply roofs. And just like laying out things in ways that, we don't often lay them out. So it was really nice to be able to build this space. I enjoyed building the pristine version of this. And then also enjoyed building the totally wrecked version of it as well, which we'll get to shortly after this. One of the things, too, that I wanted to try to impart with this region is a shininess to it. Like the city itself was built out of gold, and I remember prior to players getting access to this as part of gameplay, they could see some of the ruins in the distance, and they could see the goldness of it. And there were a number of players that thought that this was going to be the Fargathal, the fabled dwarf city of treasure, and it is not the Fargathal. That'll be a doozy to build someday if we ever build it or decide it is something that we need to build. But this was a fun space to build, and like I said, it is not often we build outdoor dwarf stuff. I remember building in North Downs, the dwarf village there, and it just feeling so weird to have these dwarf structures like homes on landscape in that way, and but different in a good way, weird in a good way. And then Then we come to the ruin. The sad, dreary ruins of once great Sundergrot, having fallen to an army of Balrogs, of all things. I also liked having these ruins be kind of the backdrop for Lindleby. It almost made it feel like for Lindleby and Lindleby homesteads, because it almost made it feel like, you know, the homesteads and the village were almost being protected by the dwarves, right? Like you had these ruins that kind of still loomed over them, watching over them and keeping them safe. You know, the ruins acting as kind of a ward away, like there are these big imposing structures here. You don't want to come any closer because who knows what still haunts it. And that's some of what helped keep the Lindleby hobbits safe and secure and hidden for as long as they did. But yeah, this, like I said, this was a fun alternate take to build. All right. So why don't we pop into, we got a few minutes left, so I'll pop in and run around dungeons and see if I can answer some more questions while we're going through that. Pow2908 says, I often feel relieved that this is a PvE, not a PvP-focused game. If people want PvP, they can go to the PvMP area, but I think it would be way less chill and relaxing of a game for me if it was PvP everywhere. I think PvP-centered gameplay certainly attracts certain kinds of communities and whatnot, and it can lead to certain experiences that not everyone really wants if they want just a chill, relaxing game. Because you switch into a PvP space, and suddenly like everything can suddenly become a fight. Everything can be a struggle, and a lot of our players don't want to be fighting the entire time that they're in the world. They want to have their peaceful homesteads and whatnot. And so I think there is value in supporting it, which is why we have PvMP. But I think that it is great that it is a opt-in opportunity as opposed to something that is omnipresent. So we're here in Scrapper's Clough. I'm trying to find my way around in here. We love it. We love a good cave claw cave, don't we? But I'm trying to find, where is he? There he is. Hello, big guy. You just chilling out in there? For those of you that may or may not know, I have, over the many years that I've been building this game, I've been hiding giant deep claws and cave claws in various places here and there, and this is... I haven't done one in a while. I think Gundabad was the last one that I had done one, so I may be well overdue to hide one somewhere again in the near future. We'll see. We will see. Tronhammer New Zealand says, "Thank you guys. Thanks to yourself and the rest of the team. This game is still kicking it. Near Harad is absolutely gorgeous and compelling story to boot." Thank you. I think one of the fun things and challenging things about building something like Near Harad is that it takes us a little bit longer to build it, because it is a new sort of environment that we are ourselves not familiar with building, right? Like, I think that was one of the things that, as we were working on it, we would regularly comment that, like, oh, well, this world stuff is taking a little bit longer than we expected it to, because we're used to working with types of assets that are very well familiar to us. Like, we know how certain bushes work and trees work and whatnot. And when you start building a region that can't rely on things, arrangements of assets that we've gotten really used to being able to use, using them in scene files and whatnot, it makes it a little bit harder for us to build something from scratch, and it makes us work a little bit more for it, and that's a good thing. I know we often, both with Legacy of Morgoth and with Corsairs of Umbar, we got about I wouldn't say negative feedback, but we got a decent amount of feedback that kind of looked at those regions, and a lot of players might have felt a little unsure about them because they're not what they're used to from Breland and from Gondor, and they feel different. They feel alien. And honestly, I think that's like a bit of fresh air that we needed for LOTRO, right? We needed to break new ground. We needed to find new places to go and visit because, we can only build the same style of environments, the classically deciduous environments, so much. So going to something like the Shield Isles, where it's a tropical island, and then going on to the Cape of Umbar and then near Harad, where it's much more arid, and then the desert starts encroaching in, I think that's good for the game because it allows us to look at what we've made and grow and do new things. Because otherwise, we kind of stagnate from a design perspective, right? Like if we're not challenging ourselves with finding new ways to build things. It's also given us like a lot of great opportunity to make brand new assets, right? Like another bit of commentary that we'll regularly see is people are like, oh, well, you're reusing the same structures and whatnot. And it's like, well, we kind of need to in order to build what we want to build. So something like Corsairs of Umbar, Legacy of Morgoth, those are opportunities for us to introduce new assets, to stretch our legs, enter into unfamiliar territories and whatnot. They're chances for us to grow and do new things, and I think that's always valuable, even if the experience itself feels a little like alien and different to people. All right, let's see. Few more questions because we're a little bit over, so I will go through a few more questions here and then we'll wrap up for the night. So Galdwin says, I don't think I appreciated this region enough at the time. It's quite a pretty area. Thank you. RPG MMO asks, question, when is the new housing coming? So we are currently working on a Rivendell-based housing neighborhood. It is in progress now. I don't have a specific timeline for when we want to release it. Housing often ends up being something where we will build it and then we will give it some time to bake. And when it was ready to go and we have kind of an open spot in our schedule for it, that's when we'll put it out there. We will be sure to announce it when it is ready to go. But for right now, it's in progress. We also, the person that was working on it, we're getting back into the swing of things after the holiday season. But hopefully we'll be moving quite along quite rapidly on it prior to starting to work on our landscapes for the region, or for the year. Which goes right into Mr. Alex's question. Any hint of which part of the world our characters are going to move next update? So that I'm not going to speak on any specifically. Our next update, the update 43 is our quality of life update. There's no new landscape regions associated with that. The raid from Legacy of Morgoth is going to be coming out with that. And we've got just a bunch of small changes here and there across the departments to kind of help improve the feel of the game. The World Team in particular, we took a handful of kind of low-level areas and spruced them up a little bit to kind of modernize them. A lot of them also suffered from just like having old and bad lighting, so we were trying to like clean those up. We'll have more announcements about where we're going specifically later on in the year. Loamfind says, there are many valley-like regions in the more modern part of the game. How would you design a full mountain zone like the Misty Mountains? Would it look similar to the zone in the game, or would it be totally different today? I think there would be parts of it that look similar, and there would be parts of it that are different. We have different tools and different skill sets now than we did when we first built it, because we are older and more experienced now, and we have a better sense of how to go about building those things. When we first built the game, this was, for a lot of us, our first experience building games. So we were just, this may be surprising to hear, we were just kind of winging it, right? Like, we're going to make this work, we're going to figure it out. But now that we're a bit more practiced and we know what does work and what doesn't work, I think we can be more confident in building kind of those areas, those kinds of areas. Boring Streamer says, about households, I hope to see really small houses, because small houses are cozy. I don't know how big the Rivendell housing neighborhood houses are going to be, but I don't think they will be on the same scale as what we did for Erebor. They're more, or even Lindleby housing. They're going to probably be more likely around the size of a Rohan house in terms of the amount of space within them. All right, let's see. I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions because I do have to wrap up. Let's see if there's one or two I can answer super quick. So Guarandes says, you are overdue for a Cave Claw, but I think King's Gondor might have one since Gundabad. I'm not sure if I put one in King's Gondor. I don't think I did. I might have. It's hard because sometimes doing all of this work sort of bleeds together and you lose track of everything. And so we will leave it with two. We'll end this on two comments. Druidfire saying, the new areas in the south were really a breath of fresh air. It definitely kept things from seeming same old, same old. I agree. I think compared to most of what we've done over the last several years, Corsairs of Umbar and Legacy of Morgoth have introduced the greatest amount of artwork into the game. New assets, so new structures, new rocks, new trees, all of that, compared to a lot of what we've done before. And I think that's part of why we were so successful in helping those areas be distinct from anywhere else that we've been before. And then the last comment before I sign off, Pow2908 says, we were just kind of winging it. Never have you been more relatable than just now, sir. Hey, we are all human beings, and we're all learning. And I think, the challenge for us now is to try not to get too comfortable with what we're building, and finding ways to, keep the game, keep the landscapes interesting and fresh, while also trying to not let our ambitions grow so big that we can't write the checks that we need to write in order to really pull off what we want to pull off. So I think what we're coming up with for this year is going to be really visually interesting. We've got a lot of great ideas for the regions that we want to build, and I think having that plan down and figured out before the end of the new year, so that we could start running and hitting the ground and figuring out what we wanted to build for this year, is really going to position us well to have another set of regions that are interesting and detailed and compelling in the same way that Corsairs of Umbar and Legacy of Morgoth landscapes were. So, anyways, I went a little bit over, but thank you everyone for hanging out here and chatting with me on our casual stroll through the Wells of Langflood. I had a lot of fun running through this region. It's great to kind of get back into the routine of these. I'd have to look at my list because I'm not sure what region we're going to next. It might even be Minas Morgul might be the next one. If I haven't already done a stream on that, I need to refresh myself. But thank you everyone for being here. Just as a reminder that tomorrow afternoon, Orion and I will be doing our We Have a Cave Troll stream at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time here on twitch.tv/LOTRO stream. And on Friday, Court of the Ring at noon is going to have Severlin as our special guest, where he's going to be able to answer all of your questions, or most of them. We'll say many of them, in regards to the upcoming 64-bit servers, and maybe even some of the stuff that we're planning for in the coming year. So if you have questions, feel free to jump in for those. The theme for tomorrow's stream with We Have a Cave Troll, Orion and I are going to be talking about the games that we played last year, the things that we liked, and how kind of the games that we play influence our own game designs, and even talk a little bit about the stuff that we're excited about playing in the coming year. So thank you everyone for attending the stream, hanging out, asking questions. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone. Stay warm.